I was standing in the doorway of a blown out building in eastern Afghanistan, dust burning my eyes, my pulse hammering like a war drum. We had intel that a hostage was inside, but we also knew the structure was rigged with traps. My job was to move first, step in, clear the corner, create the opening for my team. But for a split second, one tiny invisible moment, I hesitated. It was barely a breath, maybe half a second, but that half second almost cost a man his life. Fear didn't show up shouting. It didn't grab me by the throat. It whispered. It tried to make the choice for me. And if I had listened, that hostage would have stayed in that room forever. So when I tell you to stop letting fear make your decisions, I'm not preaching from theory. I've lived the consequences of hesitation. I've seen what fear does when you give it permission. And here's the truth people don't want to hear. Fear is already making most of your decisions. Not in dramatic moments, not in burning buildings, in the quiet places, the daily choices, the moments where you think you're being reasonable or responsible or not ready yet. Trust me, fear rarely announces itself. It slips in disguised as logic, comfort, or planning. It convinces you to wait, to delay, to think it through. But waiting is just fear dressed in strategy. What you don't realize is that fear controls about 90% of your behavior without you ever noticing. And the worst part, the longer you delay, the louder that fear becomes. According to a Harvard study, the brain exaggerates threats by up to 30% when you wait even a few extra seconds to act. That means the danger doesn't grow. Your perception of it does. Fear becomes the storyteller. And once it takes over the story, you stop being the one who decides how your life unfolds. But here's the good news, and I want you to hear me clearly here. Fear is not a life sentence. Fear is a muscle. And like any muscle, it can be trained, strengthened, rewired, modified. I learned that the hard way. During Bud S, fear wasn't something we avoided. We confronted it daily. The cold water, the long swims, the underwater drills where every second felt like your lungs were being crushed. The instructors didn't teach us to eliminate fear. They taught us to operate with it screaming in our ear. Courage, I quickly learned, is not a feeling. Courage is what happens when you act while the fear is still present. Most people get this backwards. They wait until they feel brave, confident, or ready. They wait until the fear goes away. They wait for the perfect moment, the perfect clarity, the perfect certainty, but that feeling never comes. If I had waited until I felt ready on that doorstep overseas, one more life would have been added to the cost of hesitation. You can't wait your way into courage. You can't think your way into it. You can only act your way into it. That's the mistake almost everyone makes. They assume bravery is an emotion. It's not. Bravery is a decision, and action, not motivation, is what creates the emotion of courage afterward. The SEAL teams drilled this into us from day one. We don't act because we're fearless. We act because the mission demands it, and courage arrives only after the first step is taken. So here's the secret most civilians never learn. Act first. Let courage catch up. That's the method that kept me alive. That's the method that pulled men out of fire. That's the method that will pull you out of whatever fear has been running your life. You don't need to feel brave. You only need to be willing to move while you're scared. If you can do that, just that, your entire life will start shifting. And for the first time in a long time, you'll be the one making the decisions, not your fear. I learned early in my career that the most dangerous enemy you'll ever face isn't the one holding a weapon. It's the one you don't see, the enemy that hides inside your decisions long before you make them. In the teams, we called it quiet fear. And out here in civilian life, I see it running people's entire existence without them ever realizing they're under attack. Quiet fear doesn't hit you like a punch. It slips into your thoughts, dressed like logic. It whispers, the timing isn't right. It pretends to be responsibility, caution, maturity. It tells you to wait until you've planned every detail, until the risks disappear, until you feel prepared. But that hesitation is the first sign that fear has already taken the wheel. The problem is you're not labeling it as fear, you're labeling it as wisdom. This is where the angst begins, because once fear learns it can control you through subtlety, it starts using your own personality against you. If you're organized, it makes you overthink. If you're cautious, it makes you delay. If you're ambitious, it convinces you to wait for the perfect moment. And before you know it, you've built a life around safety instead of progress. That's how quiet fear wins. It never has to scream, it just has to nudge. A small hesitation here, a small doubt there, and suddenly months or years pass with no meaningful action taken. Japanese psychologists found that micro-hesitation rewires the brain to prefer comfort. In other words, each tiny pause trains your brain to avoid growth. You're not just delaying, you're conditioning yourself to stay small. But here's the first wave of hope. Fear itself isn't the enemy. Fear is information. Fear is data. In BUD/S, our instructors drilled this into us. Fear is your body trying to tell you something, but it's not always telling you the truth. Sometimes it's warning you of danger, but more often it's warning you of discomfort, and those two things are not the same. The problem is people treat every signal as if it's life-threatening. They feel fear and assume it means stop. But you can learn to decode it. When I started reframing fear as data instead of danger, everything shifted. I realized most of the fear in my life wasn't about dying, it was about failing, being judged, losing control, being exposed. Those aren't dangers, those are growth indicators. Still, most people make the same mistake. They fight fear with motivation. They hype themselves up, watch inspirational videos, chant affirmations, read mindset books, and none of it sticks. Motivation is like a sugar rush. It spikes, it crashes, and it leaves you exactly where you started. You don't defeat fear with a feeling. You defeat fear with a pattern. And the second you understand that, the whole game changes. But that moment of realization often brings you back into angst because you suddenly see how many years you've spent trying to feel ready, trying to build up enough confidence to overpower your fear, not realizing you were using the wrong weapon the entire time. The real breakthrough came for me in BUD/S during one of the underwater confidence drills. Your body panics, your lungs scream, and every instinct tells you to surface. Motivation means nothing down there. The water doesn't care how inspired you are. What saved me was something far more practical, the 5-second interrupt protocol. It's simple. When fear strikes, you have 5 seconds to interrupt the default pattern before hesitation takes over. 5 seconds to act before the brain reroutes you back to comfort. 5 seconds to break the loop and build a new one. That tiny window is where all transformation lives. And here's the hope at the end of this emotional swing. Once you master those 5 seconds, fear stops being a dictator and becomes a messenger. You stop running from it and start using it as a compass. When fear whispers, you don't retreat. You lean in, because now you understand what it really means. This is the direction where your life expands. When you apply that consistently, quiet fear loses its power. And for the first time, you start choosing your life instead of reacting to it. I learned one of the hardest truths of my life leaning against a mud brick wall at 2 in the morning, staring at a steel door we had to breach. We had intel that a high-value target was inside, along with explosives wired along the entryway. My job was simple on paper: go first, set the charge, initiate the breach, clear the room. But war doesn't care about your plans. Right before I moved, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the whisper of fear telling me to wait just one more second. Double check. Scan again. Hold until you're sure. I listened for half a breath, and in that fraction of a moment, everything got worse. The longer I stood still, the louder the fear grew. My mind started creating threats that weren't even there. That's when it hit me. Hesitation doesn't protect you. Hesitation magnifies danger. In the teams, we had a simple rule: if you wait, you lose. And that night proved it. My delay almost exposed the whole squad. Action saved us. Not perfection, not readiness, action. Waiting is gasoline poured onto fear. People think time calms anxiety, but it does the opposite. The moment you hesitate, your brain starts spinning stories, exaggerating the threat, enlarging the danger, and building a whole universe of what ifs. Neuroscientists discovered that immediate action reduces fear signals by 50%. Half the battle disappears the moment you move. Most civilians don't understand this. They sit in silence, thinking, planning, reconsidering, assuming they're being logical. But the truth is simple. Every second you wait gives fear more power over your nervous system. Every pause teaches the brain that doubt should control decisions. And every hesitation becomes a rehearsal for future hesitation. You're not procrastinating, you're practicing avoidance. But here's where hope comes in. You don't need huge wins to rebuild your confidence. You don't need to conquer mountains. It starts with something small. Tiny decisions made quickly. Send the email, take the step, make the call, start the task. Become deposits in your mental strength account. Each quick action rewires your brain to trust you again. Each small win tells your nervous system, I act, I follow through, I move. Confidence isn't built in moments of glory. It's built in micro moments of commitment. I've seen recruits arrive terrified, uncertain, broken from their own hesitation. But when they started making fast decisions, simple ones, their entire identity began to shift. Fast decisions lead to fast growth. Still, most people make the same mistake and don't even see it happening. They wait until they feel ready. Ready to start the business, ready to leave the job, ready to have the tough conversation, ready to get in shape, ready to change their life. But readiness is a myth. If I had waited for readiness in combat, I'd be dead, and so would the men standing next to me. Readiness doesn't come before action, it comes after it. Feelings follow decisions, never the other way around. The belief that you need confidence first is the trap that keeps people stuck for years, even decades. What saved me and what saved countless others was something we used on missions when everything was falling apart. We called it the 7-second commitment drill. It's simple, brutal, and life-changing. When the moment comes, when you know what needs to be done, when the opportunity shows up, when the fear whispers, you have 7 seconds to commit, not to succeed, not to finish, just to commit. 7 seconds to take the first physical step that makes the rest of the action unavoidable. In those 7 seconds, you break fear's leverage. You teach your brain that hesitation is not an option. You interrupt the spiral before it starts. I've used that drill in combat, in relationships, in business, in daily life, and here's what I can tell you with absolute certainty. Your future is shaped in those 7 seconds, not by your plans, not by your dreams, not by your goals, by the decisions you make before fear has a chance to negotiate with you. When you adopt that rule, when you stop waiting and start committing, you don't just move faster, you become a different person, a person fear can't control anymore, a person who acts, adapts, and grows, a person who stops losing time, losing confidence, and losing opportunities. If you wait, you lose. But if you move, even imperfectly, you win far more than you realize. The world bends for the man or woman who steps first. I've seen men freeze in a firefight because fear convinced them that staying still was safer than moving. But the truth is, staying still is also a decision, a dangerous one. And out here in civilian life, I watch people make the same mistake on a slower, quieter battlefield. Fear is choosing their future without them realizing they ever surrendered control. It's choosing the job they stay in, not because it inspires them, but because it feels safe. It's choosing their money habits, holding them back from investing, negotiating, or taking opportunities because the unknown feels riskier than the familiar struggle. It's choosing their relationships, keeping them with people who drain them because the idea of being alone feels scarier than being unhappy. It's even choosing their health, convincing them to put off workouts, skip doctor visits, or avoid hard conversations with themselves. Fear doesn't scream to get its way, it whispers, nudges, persuades. It becomes the invisible architect of a life built around avoidance instead of ambition. That's the danger I want you to see. You're not just losing moments, you're losing years. But here's where hope enters the story. You can break these lifelong patterns, and the method isn't about discipline or motivation, it's about identity. I learned this during my years in the teams. The men who survived the hardest training in the world weren't the fastest, the strongest, or the most motivated. They were the ones who acted from identity. They didn't say, I hope I can make it. They said, I'm the kind of man who doesn't quit. Action flowed from who they believed they were. Researchers at Stanford found that identity-driven choices stick longer than discipline-driven choices. Discipline fades. Identity guides every decision without you even thinking about it. And the moment you start acting from the identity you want, not the fear you have, your entire trajectory changes. Still, most people make one fatal mistake. They try to remove fear. They wait for fear to disappear before they act, as if one day they'll wake up courageous, confident, ready. They chase techniques to eliminate anxiety, stop being scared, feel fearless. But trying to remove fear is like trying to drain the ocean with a cup. Fear is part of being human. You don't eliminate it, you override it. In the teams, fear didn't go away. Not once. Not on the missions where the stakes were highest. Not even after years of experience. What changed wasn't the level of fear, it was the level of identity. I never asked myself, am I scared? I asked, what does a Navy SEAL do right now? That distinction saved lives. Out here, it can save your future. And here's where the real hope appears again, stronger than before. You can override fear instantly with one simple mental tool. I call it the identity override question. It's the same question I used in combat, in training, and later in life when I faced choices that scared me. What would the strongest version of me do right now? Not next week, not when you feel ready, right now. That question cuts through fear's illusions. It bypasses hesitation. It taps into your future self, the part of you that already knows the answer. When you ask that question honestly, your brain stops searching for excuses and starts searching for alignment. Ask it when you're afraid of making a change. Ask it when you know you should speak up. Ask it when you're avoiding a hard decision. Ask it when you feel yourself shrinking. The strongest version of you isn't fearless. The strongest version of you acts despite the fear. That's the difference between people who change their lives and people who repeat the same year 50 times. Fear shouldn't choose your job, your money, your relationships, or your health. It shouldn't choose your future. You get to choose that. And every time you ask that question, every time you let identity override fear, you reclaim control of your story. Each moment becomes a step toward the life your strongest self would have built, not the life fear settled you into. There were moments in combat when my body screamed louder than any firefight ever could. Your chest tightens, your hands shake, your heart feels like it's trying to hammer its way out of your ribs. Your throat dries up, your vision sharpens, and your whole system goes on high alert. Those sensations feel so real, so overwhelming that your mind instantly labels them as danger. Most people think fear starts in the head. It doesn't. It starts in the body. And because those physical signals feel so intense, people assume they mean one thing: stop, don't move, don't speak, don't take the risk, don't push forward. I've seen men freeze, not because the enemy scared them, but because their own physiology convinced them that moving forward meant death. But your body can lie to you. And if you let those sensations be the deciding factor, fear will control every meaningful step in your life. Those physical sensations, tight chest, sweaty palms, racing heart, aren't signals that something is wrong. They're signals that your body is preparing you to perform. That's the shift most people never understand. What you're feeling isn't danger, it's energy. It's your nervous system flooding you with power, oxygen, awareness, and fuel so you can meet the moment ahead of you. When I realized that, everything changed. The first time an instructor explained it to me in BUD/S, I remember thinking, if this is energy, not danger, maybe the problem isn't what I feel. Maybe the problem is how I interpret it. And suddenly the sensations didn't own me anymore. They became signals, not warnings, tools, not shackles. That's the hope I want you to see. Fear doesn't mean stop. Fear means your body is unlocking resources for you. Most people walk away right when their biology is giving them everything they need to step forward. But this is where the next wave of angst hits. When people feel their body ramping up, their instinct is to try to calm down before they do anything. They fight their own physiology. They try to slow their heart, steady their breath, get rid of the adrenaline, eliminate the shaking. They believe that action should come from a place of peace. But that's not how humans are built. You will never outrun your biology. You'll never calm down enough to remove the fear entirely. And the more you fight your body, the worse the symptoms feel. It creates a loop. Fear rises. You resist it. Your body interprets that resistance as more danger, and the fear rises again. That's how people panic. That's how they talk themselves out of opportunities. That's how they build a life around avoiding anything that triggers those sensations. They think they're being rational, but really they've just trained themselves to stop whenever their heart rate increases. What saved me, and what has saved countless others, is something we use constantly in the teams. We called it the physiological shift. It's the simplest, most powerful way to take back control of your system in real time. You don't calm the body by resisting it. You calm the body by directing it. And the fastest way to do that is through the breath. Fear breathing is shallow and rapid. Controlled breathing is slow and intentional. According to US Navy research, controlled breathing can reduce panic by up to 70%. That's not a small shift. That's the difference between freezing and moving, between hesitation and action, between spiraling and stabilizing. The method we used was the 4-2-4 technique. 4 seconds in, hold for 2, 4 seconds out. Repeat until your system switches from threat mode to command mode. I've used it behind cover with gunfire echoing through the street. I've used it before diving into cold water drills where my lungs felt like they were shrinking. I've used it before difficult conversations, life decisions, and moments where I knew fear might try to make the choice for me. Every time the result was the same. Clarity returned, control returned. My body stopped lying to me and I could hear my own judgment again. Your body is not your enemy. Those sensations aren't signals to stop. They're signals that you're alive, you're alert, and you're capable. Once you learn to shift from fear breathing to control breathing, you stop being tricked by your own physiology. You stop letting physical sensations decide your actions. And when that happens, fear no longer dictates your path. You do. When I left the teams and stepped back into civilian life, I thought the hardest battles were behind me. But I quickly learned something that hit even deeper than anything I felt in combat. Most people aren't being held back by circumstances, talent, or opportunity. They're being held hostage by fear, fear that's running quietly in the background like a corrupted piece of software. And unless you change the system itself, that program will keep running your life. It will direct your choices, shrink your potential, and shape a future that doesn't reflect who you could have been. That's the real danger, not the fear you feel in big moments, but the fear hidden in small daily decisions. If you don't install a new operating system, you will keep getting the same results over and over for the rest of your life. But here's the hope. You don't need a life overhaul to take back control. You don't need a major breakthrough, a dramatic event, or a perfect plan. All you need is a simple, battle-tested framework, one I've used in missions, in training, and later in my personal life when everything felt uncertain. I've taught it to entrepreneurs, athletes, parents, leaders, anyone who wanted to stop being pushed around by fear. It only has 3 steps, and they're simple enough for anyone to start using today. The first step is awareness. Fear operates best in the shadows. The moment you start spotting the pattern, fear is choosing this, not me, you weaken its power. The second step is interruption. This is where tools like the 5-second interrupt and the 7-second commitment come into play. You disrupt the automatic fear response before it pulls you back into avoidance. And the third step is identity alignment. You act from the strongest version of yourself, not from the scared version. These 3 steps together form the base of your anti-fear operating system, and they're powerful because they're grounded in behavior, not emotion. But this is where most people sabotage their own progress. They believe transformation requires motivation. They wait for inspiration, energy, clarity, the right mood, the right day, the right mindset. They rev themselves up with podcasts, quotes, or hype, thinking that motivation will carry them into action. But motivation evaporates. It's unstable, inconsistent, and unpredictable. And worse, it trains you to depend on a feeling that rarely shows up when you need it most. What actually creates transformation is systems, consistent, repeatable actions that work even when you don't feel like doing them. Systems don't care if you're tired. Systems don't care if you're scared. Systems don't negotiate with your excuses, and systems outperform motivation every time. That's why the most important thing I ever created for myself and later for others is what I call the non-negotiable daily discipline, the NNDD. This is the secret that permanently reduces fear. It's one small daily action you commit to no matter what. Not 10 actions, not a massive checklist, one, a single action that proves to your brain every day that you move even when fear tries to slow you down. In the teams, our entire success depended on daily non-negotiables: checking gear, maintaining weapons, reviewing plans, training relentlessly. We didn't wait to feel ready. We acted because the system demanded it, and that's why it worked. Your NNDD can be simple. One cold shower, one uncomfortable conversation, one 10-minute walk, one small step toward the change you've been avoiding. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is the identity it builds. I am someone who takes action. A 20-year longitudinal study showed that people who take small daily actions outperform the highly motivated by 400%. That's because systems beat emotions, consistency beats intensity, and identity beats fear. This is the emotional peak, the moment your story can change, not through bravery, not through confidence, through a system that rewires who you are and how you respond to fear. When you adopt this operating system, fear stops making your decisions. You do. You take back control, one small action at a time, until your entire life reflects the strength you've been hiding from yourself for years. And here's my final promise to you. If you stop letting fear make your decisions, you take back control of your destiny, just like we did on every mission.